Warning. This is the most important
podcast
of our lifetime.
Hello, everyone.
What is Hapatarian?
So what is Hapa? So when you put together Hapatarians, what is that?
You know the thing.
They're here to awkward it up for you guys.
Which is a very interesting and beautiful mix of humanity.
Anyone who has a podcast,
You're an extremist.
Shut up!
all right, let's get to it. Hey, what's happening? And welcome to the Hapatarians Show, the #1 podcast hosted by Half Asian Man. Please don't forget to subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and in the comments, tell us how much you love the Hapa ethno state. Our guest today is a man who placed 5th in a Fred Durst lookalike contest and has guaranteed that my invite is in the mail for the new poker show he is starring in. It's the host of the Liberty Lockdown podcast, Clint Russell. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, Shane. Thanks for having me, man. Did I recognize Malice's voice in that intro?
Mouse was not in the intro as of now.
Okay. I thought one of them was. I recognized like half of them, but I didn't know if that was Malice. Anyways, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, I know that I should be getting the invite anytime, so I'm just waiting and waiting patiently.
Well, in fairness, I don't even have a contract yet, so let's cool our jets a little bit. I can't be inviting people until I'm actually hired. But yeah, hopefully that happens here soon. I think the holdup at this point is waiting on permitting for the poker hall. I would be the host of Poker with the Boys and then also manage the poker hall when I am not on the show, it's only 6 tables, so I don't think the management would consist of much. Just hiring and scheduling and shit like that. So I'm looking forward to it. Should be be really weird to move from Miami out to West Virginia, but I think I'm going to follow the opportunities wherever they lead me.
Yeah, it's going to be a big change going from the nice, beautiful beaches of Florida to the mountainous West Virginia. Yeah.
Well, he lives in like rural. It's like Maryland and Virginia and West Virginia. It's like this little tri-state thing. But it's pretty, but the weather does suck. So yeah. I'm not exactly prepared for that. But he and I were talking about it. I went out there on Friday just to play poker with him, and obviously
just to make sure they actually know how to play the game, right?
Honestly, I think that's what it was. Like, he was testing me, and fortunately, it was 6 players, and he and I both won, and everybody else lost all their money. I doubled my money, and he tripled his. So, I think I did exactly what I needed to do. I proved that I was capable, and we'll see where it leads from here. But his expectation is we were shooting the shit over like what type of guests we could get, and he thinks that like Matt Gaetz and Massey and even maybe AOC would come and play. And I was like, AOC, you got to be kidding me, dude. So if I end up playing poker against AOC and Matt Gaetz, I think the world may the world may catch on fire. That would be so crazy.
Yeah, that'd be a crazy mix of people in there. I could just imagine.
So weird.
Yeah, but the richer get richer and the poorer get poorer, because you said that you doubled and he tripled. So of course.
Exactly. He's the only person I know that's richer than me. So of course he won the most.
All right. Well, with all the festivities out of the way, we'll just get right into it. So in preparation for this, I had listened to one of your most recent episodes as of this recording, and it was talking about the Nashville shooter who just happens to be transsexual. Yep. And so the description that you gave it, I mean, you called it "The Culture War Goes Hot." And the description goes, I cover about 5 different topics on this one, but then spend most of the time trying to figure out how we turn the temperature down on the culture war. So what was your reasoning behind describing it that way? Because do you feel like the culture war is like too hot, or is maybe I'm misinterpreting it to where maybe you think the culture war isn't as important as some other people think it is? Because a lot of people think the culture is like the most important thing that's going on right now.
Right. I mean, I think in some ways the cult, like, we focus too much on it, but in other ways we're not taking it seriously enough. Like the amount of animus that exists on both sides, both from the trans alliance community, like their allies who have been very radicalized into believing that they're being, persecuted or genocided even. And then on the inverse of it, the parents that are convinced that every school teacher is indoctrinating their child into some sort of, sexual progressive ideology. And I think obviously there are instances of that on both sides. I think personally, I find the curriculum issue and the teachers indoctrinating children to be a more pervasive issue than the type of oppression that trans people deal with in terms of like murders and serious things like that. But regardless, both sides are kind of dug in. Both sides view the other as like almost subhuman and their enemies. So when you start to see people that lose their shit and they go on some killing spree, I think you got to really start to pay attention. And the same analogy I used on the show I'll use here. Ron Paul talked about how it's important that we understand why the Middle Easterners were willing to fly planes into buildings on 9/11, assuming you believe that's what transpired. Some people don't. And it's not to say like, oh, that's their justification, and I agree with it. It's just saying like, well, if someone gets to a point of desperation where they're willing to do something that dramatic, I think it's important to understand why they're doing it. And unfortunately, because they've hid the what's it called when you write up your reasoning for committing a crime? Manifesto. Yeah, because they buried the manifesto from the shooter. Like, we're not going to really know, it seems like, but I think you can guess, and I think that there's a lot of people in that community that share that sentiment. And what happened to Riley, I think her name's Gaines, I can't remember, the swimmer at San Francisco State University a couple days ago, where she was cornered in a room by a bunch of really radical college students that were allegedly, she was assaulted and kept in that room for like 3 hours, and they were telling her that she had to pay money to get out. It's, there's a lot of, in my opinion, it's very reminiscent of what I've read about the Chinese Cultural Revolution, where you have the college students and the youth that have been indoctrinated into a really dangerous worldview. And I honestly don't know how you turn that down. Like, I don't know how you get those people to like snap out of it, because as opposed to just snapping, which is what it seems like more and more of them are doing. And I think it portends really dangerous times. So it makes me nervous.
Yeah. So you had mentioned about like sexualizing children, like teachers are doing that or whatever, and however you feel about that. I mean, it's obviously that's, having a kid myself. I mean, it's like, that's like the worst thing that I can possibly imagine. Someone trying to push their agenda onto someone that I don't want that,
Me neither, man.
So that I have something that I don't know if you've seen this before, but there's this show that I guess it's on Channel 4, and it's a preview for a new show. And I'll let this speak for itself. So it's from Lauren Witzke. And her tweet says, BBC is promoting a new show where disturbed adults strip naked in front of children and normalize the kids getting naked in front of adults. The British government spent millions on this sick.
Wow.
So anyway, go ahead and watch it.
As teenagers, you're always thinking, I'm so fat.
There have definitely been times that I've looked in the mirror and hated what I see.
This is a baby step to becoming more accepting of who you are.
Being naked is not a bad thing at all.
Zero, please.
Indicate!
I think it's time that we see what real male bodies look like.
Whoa, naked men.
Do you know what? Your happiness shouldn't be reliant on whether you have this perfect shape.
A groundbreaking new series, Naked Education, starts Tuesday at 8 on Channel 4. All episodes available after on all 4.
Yeah. So, and I mean, this is in Britain. So, I mean, who knows if this would ever come here in America? I mean, for all I know, it's just down the pipe,
Yeah. Well, it might be. This is the type of stuff that, like, look, it's not every school teacher, far from it, and it's not every public school that has this being a really serious issue, but there is more and more where this type of stuff, not that aggressive, of course, but getting kids to talk about their pronouns and talk about, whether or not they feel like they're a boy or a girl. Like, I just don't think that these are ideas that you want to put into a child, like a very impressionable young person's mind. And I think that it leads them down a path of confusion and oftentimes, depression and anxiety, that in order to alleviate it, in order to fit in, they end up kind of acquiescing to the social pressures of being a part of this non-binary group. And, many of them are not, in fact, that. And I don't know how you can reach those children, because like, that's what their teachers are telling them. That's what their peer groups are telling them. That's what social media is telling them. That's what a fucking BBC is telling them for no reason. And I think that you're going to have people on the more conservative side, or even just the not crazy side, that are going to be like, all right, yeah, like this is war. Like, you can't go after my kids like that. And I don't blame them. I don't have any kids yet, but like, if I had kids that were in school and I had a teacher that was showing them, an adult naked person, man or woman, I'd be like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, have you lost your mind? And now they're putting it on TV, for God's sakes. It's like this, it's just so crazy. And so it's weird too, because like, I don't find myself to be some sort of like prudish, social conservative or anything. I'm totally fine with an adult doing whatever they want to their body, with their body, to an adult. Like, that's all good. But this is just, it's over the line. And I feel like it's intentionally inflammatory. It's like, James Lindsay describes it as, I think it's mid-level violence is what he calls it. Where it's just holding a finger, 1 inch away from someone's nose and just being like, what are you going to do about it? It's like the people that, when Jordan Peterson was on the rise, they would hold blowhorns right next to his face. And it's like, that could damage your eardrum. Like, there's no contact being done, but it's still, it's painful. It's dangerous. It can harm someone. Like, that's the type of stuff that's happening more and more. And I feel like they're just trying to get people to step over the line and become violent. I don't want to see that. And if it starts to happen consistently, well, that will only radicalize the left into believing that they are correct, that they are being persecuted, because now they're dealing with actual violence. And it's like, all right, well, then once that cycle begins, and it may have begun in Tennessee, what stops it? What allows the temperature to cool? I don't know. And that's kind of what that episode was me just, thinking it through and like wondering, how the hell do we stop this cycle? And I don't know.
Well, and I know it's not like this is 100% the reason, but of course, with like the COVID lockdowns and all the mask mandates and the vax and all that good stuff, a lot more parents are doing the homeschooling, or they're doing some kind of co-op or anything that's not going to the government school.
Sure.
And that's great. That's amazing. But that number is still going to be dramatically lower than all the kids are still going to be going to those schools, because the parents, for whatever reason, and you can't blame them for it. It's like, well, I can't afford this, or I don't have the time, or whatever the reasoning is, they have to bring their kids to that school. So it's like, okay. And just like you, like, I kind of been thinking about this, and I'm hearing other people talk about it, and it makes sense to me. It's that, okay, well, you can say, yeah, just homeschool your kids. Yeah, that's great. But there's the institution's still there. It's still being controlled by the people who hate you and probably want to see you dead. It's either you want to kill me or we're okay. Like, where are we at? So when it comes to that institution, you have to somehow take the power back. You can't just let it go. You can't just let it happen.
I know.
So
It's
like, you gotta get the school board on your side. You have to get these people on your side. You can't just be like the people who don't like voting or whatever. It's like, okay, we don't like to vote, but at the same time, it's like, if you continue to not to vote, then it's, and I used to be that person. I don't know, voting sounds stupid, and there's a lot of negatives for that. But when you see stuff like this, you feel like you have no other choice. You just you go to that route.
I agree, dude. I mean, this is part of the reason I got involved with the Libertarian Party, just even though, it's not going to likely get candidates elected on the federal level, but at the local level, it has. And I think that, whether it's that or libertarian leaning conservatives, I would vote libertarian leaning Democrats if they existed, but they don't. So, I just think like whatever tools you have at your disposal to try and slow this thing down and protect kids, like, you have to do it. and it's weird because, you know, the the reason this is so problematic is that the people on the left also believe that this is a fight to protect children. You know, like a lot of them believe that deeply, that like you have to teach them these really progressive ideas very young, because then it'll allow those that are trans to feel more accepted moving forward, blah blah blah. You know, that's their thesis. I think that thesis has been disproven if you look at I think it was like Sweden or the Netherlands, where they had this type of education that they were doing in their public schools, and they're putting an end to it. Like they realize like this is actually not to the benefit of the trans community, and it's not to the benefit of kids broadly. So I think that the people in America that are continuing to persist in this direction are pretty much disinterested in the truth of whether or not it's beneficial, and are just ideologically possessed, and they are following this path because this is what they've been told is the proper thing to do by their peer group and their college professors. And it's going to take years of them just destroying children before there's any sort of awakening as to the damage that's being done. And I don't want to see that. I agree with you. Like, voting is dumb, and voting ultimately, you know, I don't think I've ever voted for a candidate that won, so it doesn't much matter what I vote for. But I also don't think that like voting is violence. If I vote for Ron Paul, like that's not violence. Like, what are you talking about? So I just think that it's important that you vote for people that are actually, you know, promising to diminish the size of the state. And if they go on to lie and, you know, grow the size of the state and hurt people, well, that's, you didn't do that. They lied and they broke their promise. So I don't know. I think that we have to take a stand at some point, but I don't want to take a violent stand. I want it to be peaceful. And it's weird too, because I don't really want to tell other people how to raise their kids. But if I'm going to live in this country and have a bunch of children that are being indoctrinated into this ideology and having their minds broken, and like depression and anxiety and starting to become violent, like that then becomes a real danger to myself and my family. So like, I feel compelled to intervene in a way that is kind of unlibertarian. You know, you're not supposed to tell another adult how to raise their kid, but at the same time, like if you see another adult that's abusing their kid, I think that it's moral to intervene. So I feel like that's kind of how I view this, is like, it's still libertarian to say, I'm going to intervene on the behalf of your child because you're poisoning their brain. Like you're injuring them with this type of education, when in reality it's indoctrination.
Yeah. So as a sidetrack, like you're involved with the Libertarian Party. So how do you feel about Joe Exotic entering the race for president?
I mean, welcome, I guess. I don't know, guy sucks, but you know, I agree with his disdain for Carol Baskin or Baskins or whatever. So, but he's like a gun grabber idiot. So that kind of bums me out, but he's also in prison. So like, what the fuck? I mean, none of this really matters. It's just a PR stunt, really.
Yeah. It's funny too, because like, yeah, he's in prison and he could apparently still run for president. And then, you know, Donald Trump got indicted recently and he had his hearing, and everyone was flipping out saying, oh, this is it. This is the end game. The walls are finally closing in or whatever. And I read something where, and I don't know how like everything about how this works. So you probably know way more about this than I do. So correct me if I'm wrong, but his next hearing is in December. And it was just like, so they did this, and then they're going to go all the way to the end of the year. And then like the Republican or like and then like 2 months later or wherever it is, that's when the presidential election is really ramping up, because obviously he's running. It's obvious.
Yeah.
And
he already announced.
Yeah. And so he announced. So even then, like, I don't know. This whole thing doesn't, I'm just like, I don't know. And
my hope is that Joe Biden is in prison, Donald Trump is in prison, and Joe Exotic are in prison, and we have 3 candidates that are all in prison running for the presidency. That would be really symbolic of the state of our union.
I don't know. The whole thing is just ridiculous. It's a clown show. Like, it literally is a clown show.
Yes, it is.
And and I've read articles where they're saying, yeah, all the counts that he's or all the things that he's being charged with could be he gets like 134 or 136 years in jail or something.
Yeah.
But they're saying that's like extremely. So it's like, okay, what are we doing here then? Like, what are we doing? And look, I saw some people on Twitter where they're saying where he's being accused like falsifying documents, whatever. And I mean, that's not something to take lightly. Like, you can't just be like falsifying shit. Like, no, that didn't really happen. Let me white it out and put something I would like that looks good. Like, you can't just do that on like these type of documents.
Well, kind of, but at the same time, like, no one that pays hush money ever says like it's to cover up my infidelity. Like, they don't put that on their accounting when they file their taxes. It's just like, I paid this person and that's it. The fact that he funneled it through his attorney and apparently he paid his attorney back in a way that like kind of obfuscated it, but he did it through the Trump organization as opposed to him paying it personally. According to Napolitano, who I had on the same episode you listened to, had he paid it personally as opposed to paying it out of the Trump corporation, then it would have been on the up and up. But because it was from the corporation, it's essentially like using corporate funds for personal expense. And to me, that's still not a huge deal, and I don't really care. And I think that it's quite evident that this is political persecution. I think that all of the charges that they've brought against Trump to date have been complete nonsense. I think this one is a little bit less nonsense, but it's at the same time, it's like it happened 7 years ago. The statute of limitations is two years on this type of infraction. So it's clearly political in my estimation. And I think that like the nation would be completely destroyed if they were to actually imprison Donald Trump over this shit. So I hope it doesn't happen for that reason. But at the same time, like I don't think that these charges will stick, because I think that the powers that be have to know that this would be a catalyst for some real wild shit to go down in this country if they were to actually like put him away. But then again, like I would have never thought that they would have locked us in our houses for over a year. So like, anything's possible at this point, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I just because. Look, I mean, I understand like all the foreign policy. Yeah, get him a jailer, but I think we have to kind of understand that it's not going to happen. Like, it's not going to happen. Like, these people aren't going to jail for this. Like, so we need to stop talking about it, because it's not going to happen. Like, Donald Trump is not going to jail because he was like part of the assassination for some foreign. It's not going to happen. Like, Obama's not going to jail for slave markets. It's just not going to happen.
No, well, they're not ever going to go away for the reasons that they should, which is why this is such a concern to me. Is like, well, you're obviously, you have two different paths of justice. You have like, all right, if you're a political friend, then you can assassinate American citizens like Obama did. And if you're not, then we'll put you away for hush money that was paid through your corporation. It's like, all right, well, I mean, it's just, this is what you see in broken, dying empires, and I think that's what we are. So I don't think it's going to get any less crazy from here. And this is all while we still have a semi-functioning economy, and that is not going to persist much longer. So I think that the next few years are going to be very, very interesting.
So you mentioned the economy, and one video that I saw that was pretty interesting was talking about I think it was the European Central Bank, and she was talking about what was it? I have it here. Yeah. So saying that anything over 1,000 years will land you in jail. If you use those like cash payments over that, will land you in jail. Yeah. So I don't know if you've seen this or not. You might have.
Yeah, Christine
I know
Lagarde.
the main one. Like, everyone's been talking about this 24/7 clip, but there's like a full like a 3-minute clip on this. So I want to ask you, like, because I see people saying that this is kind of one of the federal government really going after like crypto, or trying to be like, is this like a sign that crypto is now becoming a threat, I suppose?
Oh yeah.
Because what was it, like Fed Pay or something like that? I don't know if that was an April Fool's joke or something like that, where someone was
No,
saying
it's
like,
real. Fed now.
it's real.
Yeah.
No, Jesus Christ.
But Fed now is between the banks. It's not for consumer use. So I think people are a little bit ahead of the game in terms of like assuming that equates to a central bank digital currency. But it is the it's the framework by which they can build a CBDC off of. So it's important that people are aware of it and probably push back. But to think that you're not going to have electronic payments between banks at some point, I mean, they basically do already. So this is just like, I think, trying to put it on a blockchain type of technology. That's going to happen. Like, you're not going to stop that. I think that the real issue is like getting rid of cash, banning cryptocurrency, like decentralized independent cryptocurrencies, and then mandating that people only transact in CBDCs or central bank digital currencies. Like, that's the real concern, and that's the red line. If they pull that off, then liberty is dead. So, but we're not there yet. The Fed now does not constitute a central bank digital currency, in my humble opinion.
But could that be something that could become something that's consumer based?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, once they have the technology and they've demonstrated that it works, then it doesn't take much to just add 300+ million accounts. Like, as of now, it'll be Fed now, and it'll exist amongst the banks. I think that after that, then they'll probably roll out consumer Fed now, and then it will be probably mandated, and then you'll have some sort of abolition movement towards cash, probably on some sort of like green justification, like, oh, we're wasting trees or whatever the fuck. Like, it's going to be total nonsense, but that's what they do. I mean, you don't have to be like, you don't have to have a crystal ball. You just have to know how their propaganda arm works, and you can kind of like track, okay, this is probably what's going to happen. So that's my opinion. I think that we will probably have a real push for central bank digital currencies sometime in 2024. But I don't think it's now. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, because I don't know. That's something that I haven't really looked into, so I don't really know a whole lot about that.
I've looked into it. I mean, it's very concerning that like you have many central banks all over the world that are headed in this direction. They're talking about it. I think it was the Chicago Fed that had a white paper on central bank digital currencies. The Biden administration came out with a presidential memorandum or whatever that said that they wanted to expedite the development of one. So like, they're headed there. Like, there's no doubt they're headed there. I think that the interesting question or dilemma dynamic that people aren't really evaluating is like, does this advent of this technology, does it benefit the central bankers of the world and the current titans of industry? Like, does that actually benefit them, or does it undermine them? And will they end up fighting on the side of us because they want to maintain their kind of technocratic control of the money supply? Or can they seamlessly transition from their current monopolistic paradigm into some sort of new one with the central bank digital currency? Obviously, they would like to do that because it is an improvement on their existing mechanisms for control. But I don't know, and if you already have such a dominant position, you're probably not going to take that risk unless you feel compelled to, or forced almost. So I think that the inflationary pressures that we're likely to experience as the petrodollar system and the US dollar as reserve currency status starts to consistently diminish over years, and the inflationary pressures start to become more profound at home, I think that's when they'll really aggressively move towards it. Because I think with the amount of debt that exists, there's no balancing these books. Like, you're not gonna have political will or public will for the amount of austerity that's necessary to get our budget in alignment. And you're also not going to be able to tax people enough to balance this shit. So it's like, it's just a matter of time before they kind of realize, like, all right, yeah, we can't keep kicking this can. It's going, like, the inflationary pressure is here. It's persistent. It's not going anywhere. We need to transition to a central bank digital currency. And that's when I think it'll happen.
So do you think, like with that in mind, do you think that's one of the reasons why they're so invested with like Russia and Ukraine? Because I read something where like Japan is diverging from the like U.S. oil reserve or something like that, and they're buying Russian oil.
Yep.
And
Well,
so,
and they're buying it in rubles,
huh.
and they're buying it over the price cap, because the West and NATO and the U.S. put a price cap on Russia's oil to the world, what they could sell it for, which is like, how the fuck do you think you have that power to just put a price cap on someone else's like primary export? It's just lunacy. So yeah, that's what's happening. But it's not just the Japanese. I mean, you have the French that just recently transacted in the yuan, or maybe Japan purchased it in yuan, or maybe it was yen. I don't know, but it wasn't the U.S. dollar, and it was also over the price cap. But then you also saw the French that did their first ever sale of LNG, which is liquefied natural gas, in the yuan as opposed to the U.S. dollar. So the Saudis have already signaled that they're willing to do it. China just brokered a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which would have never happened under the old paradigm of U.S. dominance. So I think it's quite clear that the U.S.'s stranglehold on power as the unipolar hegemon is diminishing, and it's just a matter of like, how long does this last? Can we actually transition from a unipolar to a bipolar world order without World War III? I think that, as you hinted at, almost certainly the war in Ukraine is a proxy war to defend the dollar. It's to go after yet another leader, yet another country, just as they went after Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi and Assad in Syria. Like, there's so many leaders that have been toppled or attempted to be toppled based off of their desire to not be under the thumb of the U.S. dollar trading regime. And as they say, all wars are bankers' wars. So I think that the Ukraine situation is no different. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to also talk about the Russian-Ukraine war, because I know you talked about that over at Tim Cast, where you kind of gave a brief like post-USSR history on that, and that kind of like dives into the quote-unquote unprovoked attack that Russia did on Ukraine.
Totally unprovoked.
But there was something that I haven't seen, if ever. I haven't seen anyone like in our circles even talk about this or mention it. And if someone has or has talked about this, then let me know, like, correct me if I'm wrong. But have you heard something called the Budapest Memorandum?
I have. I forget what it is, but yes.
Okay, so yeah, I wanted to kind of touch up on that, because I thought, because again, I'd never heard of this, and then I saw someone's thread talking about it, because they were kind of on the Ukraine side. So I was like, okay, I want to see what this whole thing is. I had never heard of this.
Oh yeah. That's where Ukraine gave up its nukes, right?
Right. Yeah. So that was one of the things that I wanted to kind of, because it was interesting, because it was like, okay, so Russia, US, and the UK, they all kind of agreed, yeah, Ukraine will give up their nukes in exchange for like financial compensation and this like promise, which I don't even understand why they would even. I don't know what kind of promises they were given, or how they were so sure. Oh yeah, no one's going to attack us or anything like that for whatever reason. So I don't understand how come I don't see a lot of people talking about it. Is it kind of just because it was like it was like 1994, so maybe it's his old history. Maybe they don't want to talk about it because it's nothing that would be too relevant to what's happening now. But the fact that Ukraine,
the NAFO people talk about it all the time,
right? But the fact that Ukraine did have nuclear weapons, however many they had, and then they gave them up, and having these assurances, I don't know. I'm just trying to like understand, like why? Like, okay, so they're gonna recognize their borders, but
yeah,
I mean, I don't know.
That's part of what it was. I think that may have been when they also agreed to give a lease on Crimea to Russia. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. That Russia, really all Russia wanted was Crimea. Like they wanted to have access to that warm water port for their naval purposes, and I think that's what happened. Oh, 2014? No. But I think that was because there was a lease that existed that the Ukrainians backed out of, and then Russia was like, "No, you're not backing out of it." So this is more complicated. I'm still finishing Scott's book, so I can't speak to this, with perfect historical memory, but it's very complicated. Basically, they had an agreement that was like a 100-year lease on Crimea to Russia, and then after the Maidan Revolution, they ended that lease, and then the Russians were like, "Yeah, no, you're not going to do that." And then they went in there and they, as Dave Smith calls it, coup de main. It was basically a bloodless coup to take over Crimea, and then the Russians have had it ever since. And I don't think they're going to give it up. And if they are pushed up against the wall, they'll probably use nuclear weapons to defend it, and that's how seriously they take it. Because I can't really blame them. You have all of NATO, which including now Finland, which is being added this week for no apparent fucking reason. It's all just crazy. But there's also the Niet means Niet wire or cable that was leaked by Julian Assange, which explained that in fact there was it was well known that every single person in Russia was in opposition to Ukraine being added as a member of NATO. And Kamala Harris famously in late 2022 or 2021, right before Russia invaded, said that the door is still open to NATO or to Ukraine joining NATO. So it's like this pressure to put Ukraine into NATO has been consistent, and it has been the reddest of red lines to the Russian people and to the Russian leadership forever. So as far as I'm concerned, the West just didn't take Russia seriously at all. They thought of them as a fallen foe, a joke. They're like, look, these guys can't mess with us militarily. They've already diminished their nuclear stockpile. Their economy is, nothing compared to the might of America, much less all of NATO. And they just decided to abuse them and push them as far as they could. And they pushed them to the point of, all right, now we're going to take over Ukraine. And I think that's exactly the calculation that Putin made. It's not to justify it. I think that the death of Ukrainians is absolutely horrendous, but it's also it was well known. This is going to happen. So now it's happening.
Yeah. So, okay. So I think I had the wrong thing on there. The thing that I have it on my phone, of course.
Sure.
Okay, so it says the four parties signed the memorandum containing a preamble in 6 paragraphs. I won't read every single thing because obviously that's going to take 2 weeks. So the U.S. and Russia and UK welcome the accession of Ukraine to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as non-nuclear weapon state, taking into account the commitment of Ukraine to eliminate all nuclear weapons from its territory within a specified period of time. Noting the changes in the worldwide security situation, including the end of the Cold War, which have brought about conditions for deep reductions in nuclear forces, confirm the following. That Russia, UK, US reaffirm their commitment to Ukraine in accordance with the principles of the final act of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine. So everybody's basically saying that Ukraine exists. They're basically acknowledging that they're independent. It's not like this China-Taiwan situation where it's it's a little more complicated than that. So, and then those countries reaffirm their obligation to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine, and that none of their weapons will ever be used against Ukraine, except in self-defense or otherwise in accordance with the Charter of the UN. So, obviously, we know that the U.S. government is sending billions of dollars worth of weapons and any type of military arsenal that they can bring over to Ukraine because they're considered allies. So the U.S. is doing that because the Ukraine is ally. So, like, part of me is wondering, okay, so if they didn't have that, then would this situation still be the same? And,
What do you mean?
What I mean by that is that Russia is seen as this all-powerful government that must be stopped, and yet, like, I thought the war was going to be over by 2 hours. Like, it's still going on.
Yeah, well,
and a lot of that does have to do with those American weapons, I'm sure, because American weapons are just high and mighty. They're trillions of dollars worth, but they're seen as allies. So of course, when you're an ally, when your ally over there is being attacked for whatever reason, you would want to help them.
Well, I mean, it's still different when you're talking about a proxy war with a nuclear power and a nation that has 6,000 nuclear weapons. Like, it's not a small thing. And keep in mind too, while Ukraine may be an ally, they are not a NATO member. There is no impetus or requirement for the United States or any of the NATO members to actually intervene on their behalf. In fact, the way that they're behaving in terms of giving kind of an endless budget and an endless supply of weaponry is exactly what is required in Article 5 of NATO, that they're treating them as if they are a NATO member, a de facto NATO member, when in fact they are not a NATO member. And I think that's exactly what Putin was disturbed by, is like, look, I don't want them to be a member of NATO, because if we have any skirmish that happens between the two nations, I don't want to be at war with NATO all of a sudden. And now he's acting now, and NATO is responding as if Ukraine is already a member of NATO. So it's all kind of, it's all very, very crazy. But the reality is, like, whether or not you think that, like, there's some sort of moral justification to intervene on behalf of the Ukrainians, you're still risking every man, woman, and child on this planet over ultimately which tyrant gets to rule over the eastern portion of Ukraine. And we also haven't mentioned the fact that there was shelling from Western Ukraine towards the Donbass region, the eastern portion of Ukraine, for 6 years, where they were, many would argue, ethnically cleansing Russians from the eastern portion of Ukraine, because the eastern portion of Ukraine is primarily Russian speaking, Russian leaning type of Ukrainian people. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, Ukraine's our ally, we should intervene on their behalf. It's like, there's a lot of other factors that go into this.
So it just has to do with NATO then. If they weren't a de facto member, they wouldn't even be doing anything then.
Who's they? Russia?
Yeah, Russia.
Well, I think that the reality is, like, Russia realized that Ukraine was a de facto member. So before,
how did they even become a de facto member? They just decided out of the clear blue sky that Ukraine's a de facto member. Like, how did that even come to be?
I think that the NATO was led by America, and America's State Department decided that Ukraine was a de facto NATO member, and that Ukraine would be added to NATO, much to the consternation of the Russians. They just didn't give a fuck. They're like, we're going to make Ukraine a NATO member, and we're going to make it so that if Russia ever drops a single bomb on Ukraine, that we're in World War III. Like, that's what they thought was a good idea. And it was a fucking terrible idea, because it was ultimately, in my opinion, why Putin decided to act before they became a formal member of NATO. He's like, well, I'm not going to look as if I'm actually going to war against NATO. I'm going to act now before they put Ukraine into it, because I have to have access to Crimea. This is my estimation of his calculus that he made. But I think it's a very fair one. Like, it's their only year-round warm water port for their naval outlet. Like, they cannot exist as a power in the world if they don't have access to that waterway. And if they lose that access because the Ukrainian leadership decided to unceremoniously end that lease on Crimea to Russia, well, then what the fuck choice do they have? It's like they're just going to be some landlocked, frigid wasteland half the year. Like, that's not a very tenable position to put one of the more powerful nations on earth that also has 6,000 nuclear weapons at their disposal. And I think it was very reckless to do that. You really put them in a lose-lose scenario where ultimately their willingness to now invade their neighbor became much more probable. And everybody in the U.S. State Department knew, like they all knew that this is where it was headed, and they kept this pressure up regardless. There was the I think it was the Orange Revolution in 2004, and then in 2014 the Maidan Revolution. I think that the Orange one was more, Russian backed, and then the 2014 one was more American backed. Like both sides are doing this, but the truth of the matter is, like, whether you think it's right or not for the biggest powers of the world to be intervening and manipulating other allegedly sovereign nations' elections, the truth is it's much more reasonable or justifiable for the U.S. to manipulate Mexico's election than it is for the U.S. to manipulate Ukraine's election 6,000 miles away, right? Like, it makes more sense. There's much more defense justification in saying we don't want to have, like, say there was some, like, Al-Qaeda was running for the presidency of Mexico. The U.S. would obviously intervene to make sure that didn't happen, because or ISIS. They'd be like, well, we're not going to have some sort of like Islamic terrorist state that's right on our southern border. And that's basically how Russia viewed Ukraine. Whether you agree with their assessment or not, I think that there's a very reasonable argument to be made that the U.S. would absolutely do the same thing that Russia is doing right now. So we don't have the moral authority to tell them not to do it. And that's really the argument that I'm going to make to Destiny when I debate him in 2 weeks, is like, look, I'm not saying that it's a good thing. I'm just saying that this wouldn't be happening if it weren't for the U.S. and NATO and the State Department of the U.S. And it's also totally exactly what the U.S. would be doing, except I think the U.S. would be doing it much more aggressively. They would not have been as patient and as plotting and as considerate when it came to trying to avoid civilian casualties in Ukraine, because I think that the Russians really do view the Ukrainian people as their, maybe not their brothers, but their cousins at least. Whereas, when the U.S. invades, like if you remember the shock and awe campaign in Iraq, they don't give a fuck about these people. They're just like, we're going to kill indiscriminately. And my personal opinion is that, like, the war in Ukraine would have been over a lot faster had Russia decided to treat them how the U.S. treats other nations when they invade, but they didn't. And I give them credit for that. Whereas a lot of people, now look at that as weakness. And I'm like, no, I think that they didn't want to have some prolonged insurgency because they killed so many innocent people. And I think that they were actually going about it in a much more reasonable way. Still, it's horrific. And there's now hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainians because NATO got involved and backed them, when in reality, the truth of the situation is that it will and should be that the eastern portion, the Russian speaking, the place where there's been referendums to let the people decide that they want to be part of Russia as opposed to Ukraine, which has been bombing them for years. Like, let that happen. That's the natural, like, progression of the division of this nation, because the East has been so abused by Ukraine, and no one cares about that. Everyone's just like, well, it's Ukraine, so, like, it's obviously it has to stay Ukraine. And I'm like, well, they're bombing them. They've been bombing the eastern portion of Ukraine. They've been killing these people. Like, do they not have a right to say, I don't want this anymore? I want to be under the protection of Russia? I think that that's totally fair. So as someone who believes in peaceful secession, I think that they should have the right to peacefully secede. And, I think that that's ultimately the outcome that we will see if we're fortunate enough not to see World War III.
Well, I think if Putin is afraid of NATO, which, I mean, he clearly is. I mean, that's, as you're saying, that's the main reason why he would be doing this, is because he feels that his back is against the wall.
Yep. And it is.
So if NATO is doing that, then I don't think, I mean, I'm sure, I don't know, because people were probably thinking he wouldn't be dumb enough to start whatever he was doing. But then at the same time, it's okay, so is he going to go that extra step and start World War III or whatever you want to call it? Because
you can start at any time, man.
Yeah, and but if he feels that threatened by all, because it's not like Russia. I don't know how many allies Russia has, but I'm probably going to guess it's not as many as America around the world or something like that. Because if they're not part of NATO, then, and the NATO's a bunch of, like, I don't know how many countries it is, like 1,000 it seems like. So,
well, yeah, I mean, the playing field is certainly uneven, but the truth is, like, all of these other nations, the BRICS alliance, as they call it, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Saudi Arabia,
Mhm.
now Iran, are essentially signaling, they haven't made it official, that they may be a military alliance moving forward. And I think that's really the divide. And when you talk that divide, if it includes India and China, well, now you're talking about like more than half of the world that is in alignment with the non-NATO alliance, in which case you cannot take that war on lightly. I mean, it is not a given by any stretch of the imagination that NATO will win that, and certainly not easily, and certainly not with nuclear exchanges that end all life on Earth. So this is a much more serious decision than our State Department is acting as if it is, and they really ought to reconsider. Not only is it risking World War III and nuclear holocaust, but it is also rapidly endangering the U.S.'s reserve currency status on the globe. So I think that they're playing with absolute fire, both militaristically and economically, and it is not to the benefit of the American people. And that's why I continue to speak out against it, because I'm very nervous about the trajectory of things. We don't need to be doing any of this. Like, it's totally insane. Like, we ought to just be pulling our troops back, letting Ukraine negotiate a peace where the eastern quarter of Ukraine becomes Russia, and let's end this shit. Like, what's the alternative? Fucking push Putin up against the wall to defend Crimea, force him to fire a nuke into Kiev just to see if the NATO will respond in kind. Like, do we really want to see that? To me, the answer is fucking hell no. I do not want to see that. So, and I think that's what we will see if the West doesn't just get its fucking head out of its ass. Scary shit, man.
Well, I guess you can consider that practice for when you debate destiny. I don't know if he's probably better at saying what he's going to say with his view.
Oh,
he's how I try to do it. So
he's going to go ballistic, of course. But yeah, no, that was a good trial run, and I still have 2 weeks to prepare, so I'll be much more fine tuned by then. But I'm pretty confident that this is not the side that we should be on. We should not be on the NATO fuck Russia. Ukraine is Ukraine. Let it stand forever type of mentality. I think it's just a very, very, very dangerous stance to take, and I hope that cooler heads prevail, both on the Russian, Ukrainian, and NATO side.
So to go on to end on a lighter note, there's this Virginian man who was trying to help his neighborhood out. So a Virginian man might have finally figured out how to get a city to fix the pothole, and that's to go viral on TikTok. Because as probably a lot of you know, there's this bill that are trying to ban TikTok or whatever. I don't know. But I mean, here's one example of why you shouldn't, because apparently it'll help fix a pothole. So what this guy did was he planted a tree in the pothole because he kept requesting after request to, hey, there's this pothole that needs to be fixed. And they're like, we got more important things to worry about. He's like, oh yeah, well, let me plant this big ass, or not big ass tree, but if you don't do anything, it's going to turn into a big ass tree. And so he posted that on Facebook, like photos of it, and then a TikTok video of it became viral and had like 50 million views. And then they're like, oh shit, we'll fix that pothole for you. Sorry, whoops.
That's hilarious. I love it. That's smart, man.
We didn't mean to ignore your request. We didn't know you were gonna freaking plant a tree in a freaking pothole. Whoops.
Well, Tim Pool was talking about this with Vivek Ramaswamy on his show on Friday, and he was saying, like, it's so infuriating that, like, instead of just asking either the government or a corporation to do the right thing, like, sometimes he feels forced to use his social media clout pressure to get people to do the right thing. And this is a good example of that. Like, you have now kind of people power through the virality properties that allow you to put pressure on powerful entities that will otherwise ignore you. And it's like, all right, well, hey, power to the people, I guess. I mean,
yeah,
it's hilarious. It's a great idea too. I'm glad that they did that.
All right, Clint. Well, thank you so much for your time. You can let people know where they can find you and follow you and all that good stuff.
Yeah, at Liberty Lockpod on Twitter, Liberty Lockdown, any podcatchers out there, and I will be back on YouTube tomorrow. I've been on Rumble in the interim, but I will be back on YouTube tomorrow with Gabriel. I don't know if his last name's Assange. I think it might be something else, but Julian Assange's father, Gabriel. So it's gonna be powerful. I'm super pumped about it. So everybody check that out. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, and there was a photo of him going around Julian Assange, but it turned out to be a fake.
Yes,
So,
I know. AI. And then there was also Dennis that put out a fake fucking New York Times article saying that Julian was found dead. And I was like, oh, why would you do that, man? People were
brilliant stuff, Dennis. I love that. It was awesome.
People were absolutely furious with him. I actually, like, it took my breath away when I first saw it, and then I was like, oh no, and I knew right away it was Dennis.
Yeah, he's a good one.
Oh man, so funny.
All right, well, thanks to everyone for watching and listening, and we'll see you in the next one. The truck's backing up because they're hearing us. I think it's time to end this episode.
And smash that like button.
Yeah, smash that like button.
Just break your computer.
And don't forget to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button.
Bye.
Bye.